after a disappointing opening in the select international territories where it opened 1 week earlier. Terminator Dark Fate outright flopped when it failed to break even 30 million over the course of its domestic opening weekend. That does not bode well for the future of the franchise that probably should not have been a franchise in the first place. But even so, how could it have opened this bad? The Terminator has come back from bad openings before, but will there be any coming back from this? In this post-mortem, I will give my take on how it could have come to this, by first going through the exploitation of the Terminator brand and subsequent evaporation of audience goodwill, and the 2 fatal mistakes leading up to the movie's release. Then I'll go through the numbers we have gotten so far, if there is a way forward for the Terminator from here, and which other repercussions may follow. If you like the content of this video, then please leave a like and help share it. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and indicate that you want notifications for all uploaded videos. With that out of the way, let's dive in. I think there are a few big reasons why Dark Fate either underperformed or outright flopped, even in the parts of the world where Genesis did well 4 years ago. First among those reasons is that the Terminator brand is tarnished now, and the audience goodwill from the revelation that was Terminator 2 has evaporated. Allow me to elaborate on exactly how that happened, and as importantly, why it could happen. The original Terminator came about because creator James Cameron had a vision, a story he wanted to tell. He did not consider that story to have ended when the credits rolled on the original movie, because he already had ideas of where the story could go next. Those ideas were further refined into Terminator 2, which is how that movie came about. The idea and the vision were there first. Then Cameron and his collaborators had to work hard to make all the ducks line up, get all the rights issues sorted out, and subsequently the movie made. The first Terminator was a hit, but Terminator 2 was a mega hit, the biggest movie of its year of release, and everyone loved it. After Terminator 2, however, James Cameron did consider the story to have been told, and he never pursued making another Terminator movie. Maybe it should have been laid to rest with that. The story had been told, and it was done. If enough years had been allowed to pass, then maybe Cameron would have seen a natural way to continue the story. Or maybe another filmmaker with compatible sensibilities to what Cameron had in the 80s and 90s could have continued the story in another new exciting direction. But that is not what happened. Let's see what did happen and how that contrasts to the original 2 movies. As we covered in our Ultimate Terminator Retrospective, the Terminator rights never had any one consistent corporate owner who would protect and preserve the brand. Cameron had to sell the rights in order to get the original movie made in the first place, and from there, they were passed from one party to another, and more often than not, shamelessly exploited in the process. When Collateral, the production company behind Terminator 2, floundered, its founders Andrew Vajna and Mario Casar were able to secure the Terminator rights, and they wanted to make a 3rd and a 4th Terminator movie, and eventually a TV series. Not because they had found a natural way to progress the story forwards, but because they were trying to re-establish themselves as players in Hollywood, and they used the Terminator brand as a means to achieve that end. An end which was ultimately unsuccessful. Terminator 3 was made, but never felt like a genuine Terminator movie. The direct sequel they had planned for it never saw the light of day, and the TV series, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, which honestly wasn't half bad, and if anything felt more like the natural progression of Terminator 2 than the 3rd movie did, was nonetheless cancelled prematurely, while Vajna and Casar's new company also floundered. They never made another big-budget feature after that. The rights were then picked up by the Halcyon Company. Its founders, Viktor Kubitschek and Derek Anderson, a trader and an advertiser, wanted to pick up the rights to respected intellectual property. Any would do, and then exploit that for cash. Since the Terminator rights just so happened to be up for grabs, they grabbed them, and subsequently set about making a new Terminator trilogy. Not because they had a story in mind that required a trilogy, but because they wanted to establish a film franchise and a merchandise operation and get the audience on board for the long haul. However, they did not know the first thing about filmmaking, and relied on other producers to help them. They would later claim, in not so many words, that the appointed producers had conspired with their funding partner, the Pacificor hedge fund, to make the first movie, Terminator Salvation, so incredibly expensive it couldn't help but flop. That way, Halcyon would flounder, enabling Pacificor to claim the rights. Which in the end is more or less what happened. Years later, the rights were first sold to Annapurna's Megan Ellison, who passed them on to her brother, Skydance's David Ellison. I won't claim to know their motivation for picking up the Terminator rights, but it certainly wasn't because they had a story that needed to be told in place. The original intention was to start a trilogy with Terminator Genesis that had to be completed before Cameron reacquired the rights. Interestingly, Terminator Genesis tried a similar time travel into alternate universe ordeal that had been done in another movie also co-funded and co-produced by Skydance, namely Star Trek 09. Be that as it may, Terminator Sega Genesis failed, and when it did, Ellison shifted his strategy towards starting a new trilogy with Terminator Dark Fate that could be completed after Cameron had regained the rights. Those shifting goals indicate there never was a plan or vision behind that either. The desire was for a Terminator trilogy. Any Terminator trilogy. To summarize, the original two movies were story-driven and made only because the filmmaker had a vision that needed to be brought to life. By contrast, every single sequel after that was made as nothing more than a means to achieve another end. Whether that be a quick buck, bring one's career back on track, or who knows what else. To put it bluntly, every installment from Terminator 3 onwards were soulless cash grabs. Whoever owned the rights at the time could exploit them as they saw fit, as there was no corporate guardian and no quality control, by the time of Dark Fate. That finally caught up with the brand. Following the double whammy of Salvation 10 years ago, and especially of Genesis 4 years ago, the audience had had enough. It would take something truly special, something out of the ordinary, to reignite any kind of audience interest in the Terminator brand. To producer David Ellison's credit, he tried. He got James Cameron back, at least in some limited capacity, much more limited than we were led to believe. But Cameron in turn got Linda Hamilton back. All of that goodwill was undermined, however, the moment audiences got whiff of what the movie was actually about. Ever since intersectional ideology and identity politics made their entrance into Hollywood, portraying males as either inept, evil, or both, especially if they're Caucasian, and all females as innately superior in every way has been all the rage. And it's especially prevalent in franchises that historically appealed to men. In August of 2018, the first publicity image of Terminator Dark Fate was released, and it was very clear in its message. This one is for the woke crowd. That was their first critical mistake with the movie itself. Going woke doesn't always equal going broke. It will lead to a lot of backing within the media and the industry, but audiences don't always appreciate it, and some executives are beginning to take notice. Case in point, there are reports that the Naomi Watts-led Game of Thrones prequel Blood Moon was cancelled on account of it being too woke. Be that as it may, strong women have always been a hallmark of the Terminator movies, so that is something that Terminator fans are very, very open to. When you get right down to it, the two good movies were ultimately always about Sarah Connor, and Linda Hamilton's return to the role got a lot of people very excited. But releasing that image in the current climate, without Schwarzenegger, but with the promise that the border to Mexico was a theme in the movie, did not sit well with a lot of people. Quite a few fans subsequently voiced their concern that with Dark Fate, which many now started calling woke fate, Terminator might have fallen prey to the political ideology permeating Hollywood as well. This fan frustration was, of course, labeled as misogyny. The fears were confirmed with the release of the trailer in May, a trailer which bored everyone to tears with its lousy selection of music. Then, director Tim Miller made it all worse by openly attacking the fans in an interview with Variety. In this interview, he made it clear that he either did not understand or did not want to understand why fans were unhappy. Instead, he resorted to the tired old tricks of strawman arguments and gaslighting, straight out of the Ghostbusters, Star Trek Discovery, and Disney Star Wars playbooks. Speaking about Mackenzie Davis, Miller's exact words were, "If you're at all enlightened, she'll play like gangbusters. If you're a closet misogynist, she'll scare the fuck out of you, because she's tough and strong but very feminine. We did not trade certain gender traits for others. She's just very strong, and that frightens some dudes. You can see online the responses to some of the early shit that's out there. Trolls on the internet. I don't give a fuck." This blatant misrepresentation of what fans were unhappy with did not win him any popularity contests, let's say. Things did not get any better when the plot leaked online, including the ultimate fate of John Connor. After having his importance established as the driving force behind the story of the first Terminator, and the second being devoted to saving him, Terminator Dark Fate disrespected both John Connor, Sarah Connor, and the legacy of the originals worse than any of the other previous cash grab sequels by killing him inside the first 2 minutes. That was the second critical mistake of the movie itself, and it ties in with the first mistake of going woke. In killing John Connor so early, they pulled an Alien 3 on the Terminator franchise. In Alien 3, Newt and Hicks from James Cameron's Aliens were killed off-screen before the opening credits, and Cameron was none too pleased about it then. Now, he did the same to John Connor, and as it turned out, audiences were none too pleased about it. The movie lost a good chunk of the audience right there. The movie rolled out worldwide over the course of 3 weeks, and it underperformed in every single territory. The movie has an estimated break-even point around or slightly below 500 million, and it is extremely unlikely to get anywhere near that at this rate. On the contrary, industry analysts are already projecting a loss in the $100 to $130 million range, depending on how it holds up in the upcoming weeks. You can safely assume that the planned sequels to this intended trilogy starter will not see the light of day. Instead, Terminator Dark Fate just became the final installment of the trilogy of failed Terminator trilogy starters, alongside Terminator Genisys and Terminator Salvation. You might note I haven't said too much about the movie itself so far. The reason for that is quite simply because most audiences chose to give this movie a miss without actually seeing it. In this post-mortem, I gave the reasons why. Check out our roundtable discussion with Mr. H Reviews for our spoiler-filled review of the movie itself. So at this point, what comes next? Is there a way forward for the Terminator? I'm not sure there is. Certainly not at this level of production cost. The damage may be too great at this point. They've pulled out every marketing card they had, from Arnold to Linda Hamilton, but it was all wasted on subpar movies. At the same time though, if you say The Terminator, audiences know what you're talking about. That brand recognizability is enough that it's not outside the realm of possibility that The Terminator could be revived at some point in the future, if someone can be tricked into paying for it. But the budget is going to have to come down, and by quite a lot, for anyone to be willing to do that. But like before, Terminator flopping could have collateral damage even outside of the Terminator franchise. When Terminator Genesis was set to open back in 2015, Universal were paying close attention. They had spent years developing Legend of Conan, the fabled third Conan movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, but they had gotten cold feet. They were nervous about pumping $150 million into a Conan movie, as they were unsure if Arnold as Conan was a sufficient draw to justify such an expense. To measure if it was, they looked at how big a draw Arnold back as the Terminator would be. As it turned out, not enough, and so they pulled the plug on Legend of Conan. Since then, Arnold has been trying to set up a Conan project elsewhere, and comments he has made at various Q&A sessions this last year seem to indicate that he knows something the rest of us don't. Perhaps something about a new movie or even a series being in development? If that is the case, I hope no one in charge of it looked towards the Terminator this time, because then that could mark the second occasion a Terminator movie killed a Conan movie. On that note, do you know the answer to the riddle of steel? If you're in doubt, you should click on this thumbnail to find the real answer. And as usual, you should let me know your thoughts on Dark Fate and all other things Terminator in the comments.